Hi, I'm Chad with Move for a Guitar. This lesson is from our series, Music Theory for Guitar. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about the melodic minor scale. First off, if you like the diagrams for everything in this series, including the diagrams for this lesson, you can download our free e-guide, Music Theory for Guitar. And this e-guide will be something that you can study and use as a reference for years to come. And like I said, it's free, so there's no reason not to just go download it. This is part 6.4 from our series, Music Theory for Guitar. If you'd like to go back and start at the beginning, you can click the link on the screen. So far we've looked at the major scale and its modes, the major and minor pentatonic scales, the blues scales, and other mode pentatonic scales. And basically everything we've been talking about with the scales so far have been straight out of the major scale and the major scale modes. That's what everything has been based on. This lesson we're actually going to change gears and talk about a scale that isn't based on the major scale or its modes. It's a standalone scale and has its own modes. It'll still relate back to the major scale when we're talking about its intervals and how it relates to the major scale, because in Western music we relate everything back to the major scale. But it's its own scale, it has its own modes, its own chords, so it's really important to understand by itself. And this is a really common scale that you run across in jazz, but it's used in other types of music as well, so it's important to learn for lots of different types of music, especially if you want to get into more advanced music. And the melodic minor scale is only one note different from the major scale. So what's on your screen right now is the G major scale. To get to the melodic minor scale from the G major scale, all you have to do is lower the threes to flat threes, and then you have a melodic minor scale. Or the next closely related scale to it is the Dorian mode. So the only difference between the Dorian mode and the melodic minor scale is that a Dorian mode has a flat 7, melodic minor has a major 7. So to get from Dorian to melodic minor, you would just raise the 7s half a step to the major 7s, and that would give you the melodic minor scale as well. So you can look at it from either way. Other people look at it from the Aeolian mode, and to get there from the Aeolian mode, you would raise the 7 half a step and raise the 6 half a step, but I think it's easier to look at it from the major scale or the Dorian mode because you're only changing one interval. So the melodic minor scale is root 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And in classical theory, the melodic minor scale ascends with these intervals, root 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but actually descends with the Aeolian mode or the natural minor scale. So it actually descends with the 7 going to a flat 7 and the 6 going to a flat 6. And in jazz, that's not used at all, and I base everything I do on a jazz theory, more of a jazz theory understanding, so it's not something you have to think about if you're going into jazz or blues or anything related to those type of genres. It's something you have to think about if you want to be a classical player, but I don't base what I teach on classical because I don't teach classical music. And because of this, because the melodic minor scale in jazz stays the same ascending and descending, a lot of times it's called the jazz minor scale. So if you ever hear jazz minor scale, that's the melodic minor scale for jazz. That ascends and descends the same way. And the melodic minor scale is different than the major scale and the major scale modes. With the major scale, you build chord progressions out of it, and there's all this different harmony you build with the major scale. That's not very common with the melodic minor scale. Typically with the melodic minor scale, you're using its modes, or you're superimposing the scale over chords that actually don't come out of the scale, which we'll talk a little bit about in this lesson and the next lesson. But I'm not diving too deep into this scale or the scales that we're going to be talking about coming up. These are going to be more of an overview because I'm going to create a whole series that's based on scales that aren't the major scales, and we'll dive deeper into the theory behind everything. With this series, it's more about everything that relates to the major scale and its modes, but these are important scales to understand and at least have a basic knowledge of because you're going to run across them all the time if you get into more advanced music. So you can see that if you build a triad with the melodic minor scale, you get a minor triad. So this is shown in G, so you get a G minor chord. But what makes it different than the other minor scales that we've talked about, which have all come out of the major scale, is that you have a major 7th with a minor triad. We didn't have that with any of the other minor scales that we've talked about. They all had minor 7ths. And if you take a minor triad and add a major 7th to it, you end up with a chord called minor major 7. So this would be a G minor major 7 if you took the root, flat 3, 5, and 7 shown on your screen. So it's a very unique and distinct sound to have that minor major 7 sound. It's not the only scale that produces that, but it definitely doesn't come out of the major scale modes. And it's a much more dissonant sounding chord than basic major scale harmony because we're not used to it the same way in Western music. We're used to hearing minor triads with a flat 7, and that's a very consonant sound to our ears. And if you ever came across a minor major 7 chord, you could use the melodic minor to solo over it. But a lot of times actually the melodic minor scale is just used superimposed over a minor 7 chord. So even if the harmony isn't coming out of the melodic minor scale, in jazz or other music, a lot of times they'll use a melodic minor scale over a minor 7 chord. And you just have to be careful about that major 7 because a minor 7 has a flat 7 in it, so that would not be a good resting tone. But it creates a really unique sound to use a melodic minor scale over a minor 7 chord. But we'll talk about that a little more in the next lesson because I'm going to talk about the chords for melodic minor scale and the modes. So to simplify the patterns without having to think about totally different patterns to learn for the melodic minor scale, you can think about the major scale and all the patterns that you already know. Here's pattern 1 of the major scale. I've just drawn it in C, but it doesn't matter what key it's in, it'd be the same. If you took the patterns from the major scale and just lowered the 3s, you would end up with a melodic minor scale pattern. So you could think about it that way, which would make it simpler than just learning new scales out of nowhere, new scale patterns starting from scratch. Or what I like to do is take the Dorian mode scales, and the scale patterns from the Dorian mode, as you know, are the same as the scale patterns from the major scale. It's just you have different intervals. And Dorian mode pattern 1 is the same as major scale pattern 2, the fingering is. So if you started with Dorian mode pattern 1, you could get to your melodic minor scale patterns just by raising your flat 7s up to major 7s, and that would give you melodic minor scale patterns. So that's the way I like to think about it, is just taking the Dorian mode and raising all the flat 7s, and that gives me all my melodic minor scale patterns. And that's what I've drawn here. These are all based on starting with the Dorian mode and raising the 7s half a step, and that would give you these 7 patterns. So that's an overview of the melodic minor scale. Go ahead and move on to the next lesson where I'm going to talk about the chords and the modes of the melodic minor scale. And be sure to download the e-guide. All these diagrams are in there, and be sure to subscribe because we add at least one new lesson every day.